back in September 2018, up in northern British Columbia. I was 34 and working a 6-month contract studying wildlife migration patterns near a remote research facility. The place sat deep in the woods, hours from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but mist and silence. I'd heard the rumors from day one, whispers among the small crew about something they kept in an outdoor enclosure, something the government wanted studied but never publicly acknowledged. I didn't believe it then. I thought it was hazing, the kind of story you tell the new guy to see if he'll bite. But on a quiet night in late September, I recorded something on the security cameras I still keep on an encrypted drive in my desk drawer. I've never shown it to anyone. I thought the worst part would be watching the footage again. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing what it was trying to tell me. The facility hummed with the low drone of the backup generator, a sound I'd grown so used to it barely registered anymore. September nights in that part of British Columbia came heavy with mist, the kind that clung to the windows and made the forest beyond look like it was breathing. I'd been there nearly 6 months, logging data on black bears and wolves, writing reports no one seemed to read, and trying not to think too hard about the thing they kept in the reinforced enclosure near the back perimeter. Most of the staff avoided talking about it directly. They'd mention the subject or the specimen in passing, always with a glance over their shoulder, always in hushed tones that felt more like superstition than science. I'd seen it twice from a distance, a massive shape moving behind the chain link and reinforced steel, broad-shouldered and covered in dark hair. The first time I'd convinced myself it was a bear. The second time, I saw it stand upright, and I stopped trying to convince myself of anything. That night, the mist pressed so thick against the glass I couldn't see. Past the floodlights, the silence felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. No owls, no rustling, just the hum of the generator and the occasional creak of the building settling. I sat in the monitoring room, watching the grid of security feeds, telling myself it was just another quiet shift. My hands shook as I adjusted the lens on camera 6, the one aimed at the enclosure. I blamed it on the cold, but I knew better. Something about that night felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing the drop was there but not how far down it went. It wasn't supposed to work out this way. When I took the contract, they told me I'd be studying migration patterns, tracking known species, contributing to conservation research. They didn't mention Bigfoot. They didn't say the word at all until I'd been there 3 weeks, and even then, it came out like a joke from one of the senior researchers, a woman named Dr. Ellison, who'd been at the facility for 2 years. We were standing in the break room, pouring bad coffee from a machine that rattled like it had a grudge, when she said it. "You've seen the Bigfoot yet?" She didn't smile. She didn't wait for an answer. She just stirred her coffee and walked back down the hallway, her footsteps echoing against the tile. I asked around after that, carefully. The kind of questions you ask when you're trying not to sound crazy. The answers came in fragments. One researcher said it had been captured in the Yukon, injured and alone, nearly starved. Another said it had been here for years, studied and monitored, kept secret because the public wasn't ready. A third researcher, a quiet man who barely spoke, told me the creature could communicate, that it understood more than anyone wanted to admit. "It's harmless," he said, staring into his mug, "like a wild animal in a cage. But it knows. It knows it's trapped." I didn't believe them. I told myself it was folklore exaggeration, the kind of stories that grow in isolated places where people have too much time and not enough company. But late at night, when the facility settled into silence, I'd hear things. Low sounds from the direction of the enclosure. Not roars, not growls. Something softer, almost like humming. I never asked what they fed it. I never asked why it was here, or what they planned to do with it. I think part of me didn't want to know. The other part was afraid the answer would be worse than anything I could imagine. The first sign came early, too early for anything to feel wrong yet. It was the first week of October, just after dawn, the sky still gray and heavy with the promise of rain. I was in the equipment room, checking batteries and prepping cameras for a tracking run scheduled later that week. The facility was quiet. Most of the staff didn't arrive until 8 or 9, and I liked the solitude, the way the building felt like it belonged to me in those early hours. Then I heard it. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate knocks, evenly spaced. They came from the direction of the enclosure, clear and sharp against the silence. I stopped moving, listened. 3 more knocks. Then nothing. I checked the schedule pinned to the wall. The Bigfoot was supposed to be outside today, in the open yard attached to the enclosure, part of a routine they followed to give it space and light. It shouldn't have been inside. It shouldn't have been near the metal walls where the sound was coming from. I walked down the hallway, my boots too loud against the floor, and stopped at the observation window that overlooked the yard. The creature was there, standing near the far fence, its back to me, facing the tree line, motionless. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of the knocking, trying to convince myself it had come from somewhere else. A branch hitting the roof, thermal expansion in the walls, anything. But I couldn't shake the feeling. The knocking had been too rhythmic, too intentional. It sounded like a signal. I spent the rest of the morning distracted, checking the cameras, replaying the audio feed from the hallway. Nothing. Just silence and the hum of the building. But when I walked past the enclosure again that afternoon, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. 3 small stones stacked on top of each other near the fence line, balanced carefully, deliberately. No one else mentioned it. No one else seemed to notice. I didn't say anything either. I just walked back inside and locked the equipment room behind me, my heart beating too fast for a morning that was supposed to be routine. By mid-October, the knocking had become a pattern. 3 knocks, always in the early morning or late at night, always from the same direction. I started marking them in my field journal, logging the times, trying to find some kind of logic. October 7th, 5:43 a.m. October 9th, 11:15 p.m. October 12th, 4:32 a.m. I didn't tell anyone. It felt too strange, too easy to dismiss. But the stones kept appearing. Small stacks near the fence, sometimes just 2 or 3, sometimes 5 or 6, balanced impossibly on uneven ground. I'd find them in the morning and they'd be gone by the afternoon, scattered like someone had kicked them over. One evening I stayed late in the monitoring room, watching the feeds, waiting. The Bigfoot moved slowly around the yard, its gait heavy but deliberate, almost careful. It stopped near the fence, crouched down, and picked up a stone. For a long time it just held it, turning it over in its massive hands. Then it placed it on the ground, chose another, and stacked them. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath fogging the screen. It wasn't random. It was building something, a marker maybe, a message. The next morning, I walked out to the yard before anyone else arrived. The air smelled like wet earth and pine, and the mist hung low between the trees. The Bigfoot was inside, resting in the far corner of the enclosure, but the stones were still there. I crouched down next to them, studying the stack. 6 stones, each one smaller than the last, balanced in a near-perfect tower. I heard footsteps behind me and turned. Dr. Ellison stood a few feet away, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You've noticed," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "What is it doing?" She looked past me toward the enclosure. "We don't know. It's been doing it for months. Some of the staff think it's bored. Others think it's trying to communicate." "And you?" She met my eyes. "I think it's smarter than we give it credit for. And I think we should be listening." She walked away before I could ask what she meant. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the stones, wondering what message I was missing. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. By late October, it wasn't just 3 knocks anymore. Sometimes it was 5, sometimes 7, always in odd numbers, always spaced with the same deliberate rhythm. I started hearing it in my sleep, waking up at 3 a.m. convinced the sound was coming from inside my quarters. I wasn't the only one noticing anymore. Dr. Ellison mentioned it during a staff meeting, her tone careful, clinical. The subject is exhibiting increased vocalizations and physical signaling. We're documenting the behavior, but we don't have a clear explanation yet. One of the junior researchers, a man named Collins, laughed. Maybe Bigfoot's trying to tell us something. No one else laughed. The room went quiet, and Dr. Ellison just nodded. Maybe it is. I started spending more time in the observation room, watching the cameras, taking notes. The Bigfoot moved differently now. It paced the perimeter of the yard, stopping every few feet to look toward the forest. Sometimes it would stand completely still for 10-15 minutes, just staring. And then, without warning, it would turn and knock on the metal wall 3 times, 5 times, 7. On October 23rd, I saw it point. It was late afternoon, the light fading fast, the sky bruised purple and gray. The Bigfoot stood near the fence, one arm extended, its finger aimed toward the tree line. It held the position for nearly a minute, then lowered its arm and knocked on the fence 3 times. I rewound the footage, watched it again. The gesture was too deliberate to be random. It was showing me something, warning me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the stones, the knocking, the way the Bigfoot stood facing the forest like it was waiting for something to emerge. I pulled up the audio files, isolated the knocking patterns, played them back at different speeds. Underneath the knocks, I heard something else. A low, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, almost like a voice. I walked outside just after midnight, standing in the cold under the floodlights, staring at the dark wall of trees beyond the fence. The forest looked endless, impenetrable. Somewhere out there, something was moving. I could feel it, the same way you feel a storm coming before the first drop of rain. The Bigfoot appeared at the fence, its eyes catching the light, glowing faintly. It looked at me, not past me, not through me, at me, and then it raised its arm again, pointing toward the trees. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there, frozen, while the creature held its position, its gaze locked on mine. When it finally lowered its arm, it knocked on the fence 3 times. I went back inside and locked the door behind me, my hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. The ranger arrived on October 25th. I didn't call him. Dr. Ellison did, after one of the perimeter motion sensors triggered 3 nights in a row, always between 2 and 4 a.m., always in the same section of the fence line. She told him it was probably a bear, maybe a moose, something large enough to set off the sensors but not aggressive enough to warrant serious concern. His name was Mercer, a solid man in his 50s with the kind of face that had seen plenty of long winters. He walked the perimeter with us, checked the sensors, studied the ground for tracks. He found prints near the eastern fence, large, deep, 5-toed. He crouched down next to them, measuring with his hand. "Black bear," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Dr. Ellison nodded. "That's what we thought." Mercer looked toward the enclosure. "What's in there?" "Research subject," she said. "Classified." He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Rangers up here knew when not to ask questions. He walked the fence line one more time, then told us to keep the floodlights on at night and report anything unusual. As he left, he paused near his truck and looked back at me. "You hear anything strange out here? Knocking, maybe? Vocalizations?" I hesitated. "Sometimes." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too. About 15 miles south of here, near the old logging roads, hunters. Reported it last month. 3 knocks, always at night. They thought it was another group messing with them." He opened his truck door, then stopped. "If you hear it again, call me. Don't go looking for it." He drove off, and I stood there in the cold, watching his taillights disappear into the mist. That night, the Bigfoot didn't knock. It stood at the fence, silent, its massive form barely visible in the shadows beyond the floodlights. I watched it from the observation room, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring into the forest like it was waiting. At 3:47 a.m., I heard it, not knocking. A voice, low, guttural, but unmistakably vocal. It came from the direction of the trees, distant but clear. The Bigfoot turned its head toward the sound, then looked back at the facility. At me. I don't know how long we stayed like that, locked in some kind of silent understanding. But when the sound came, again, closer this time, the Bigfoot moved. It backed away from the fence, retreating into the far corner of the enclosure, and crouched down low. It was afraid. And if something that size, that strong, was afraid, then I should be too. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the observation room watching the cameras, waiting for something to step out of the trees. Nothing did. But the feeling didn't go away. On October 28th, the power went out. Not just at the facility, the whole grid, stretching 20 miles in every direction. The backup generator kicked in after a few seconds, but the lights flickered, the cameras rebooted, and for nearly 30 seconds, we were in complete darkness. When the monitors came back online, the Bigfoot was standing at the fence, gripping the chain link with both hands, staring directly at the main building, directly at the camera. I'd never seen it that close to the facility before. It was violating every boundary it had maintained for months. Dr. Ellison called an emergency meeting. 6 of us gathered in the conference room, the lights overhead buzzing faintly, casting harsh shadows across the table. She didn't waste time. Whatever's happening out there, it's escalating. The subject is exhibiting stress behaviors we've never seen before. I want everyone on high alert. No one goes outside alone. No one approaches the enclosure without clearance. Collins spoke up. You think it's dangerous? She looked at him for a long time before answering. I think it's terrified, and that might be worse. I wanted to tell them about the voice I'd heard, the way the Bigfoot had retreated, the look in its eyes. But the words stuck in my throat. It felt too personal, too strange. Instead, I asked the question no one else would. What if it's not afraid of us? What if it's trying to warn us? The room went silent. Dr. Ellison met my eyes, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not disbelief, recognition. Then we need to figure out what it's warning us about, she said quietly. That night, I went back through every piece of footage from the past month, looking for patterns. The knocking always came before the motion sensors triggered. The stones appeared after nights when the forest went completely silent. The Bigfoot pointed toward the same section of trees, over and over, like it was marking a direction. I pulled up a topographic map of the area, traced the line from the enclosure to the tree line, and followed it northeast. 5 miles out, the map showed a steep ravine, heavily forested, inaccessible by road. Local reports from the past decade mentioned strange activity in that area. Missing livestock, unusual tracks, hunters refusing to return. I printed the map and brought it to Dr. Ellison the next morning. She studied it, her jaw tight. We can't go out there, she said. Not without authorization, not without... Then what do we do? I asked. Just wait? She folded the map carefully and handed it back to me. We watch, we document, and we hope to God it doesn't come any closer. But I could see it in her eyes. She didn't believe that anymore. Neither did I. On November 1st, the Bigfoot stopped eating. The staff brought food to the enclosure as usual, fruits, vegetables, raw fish, and left it near the feeding area. The creature didn't touch it. It just sat in the corner, staring toward the forest, motionless. Dr. Ellison tried everything. Fresh food, different varieties, even cooked meat, which we'd never offered before. Nothing. The Bigfoot wouldn't even look at it. By November 3rd, the staff was panicking. Collins suggested sedation, a medical evaluation. But Dr. Ellison refused. We're not going in there, not while it's like this. I volunteered to try something different. I didn't have a plan, just a gut feeling that the Bigfoot wasn't refusing food because it was sick. It was refusing because it was waiting. That evening, I walked out to the enclosure alone, carrying a basket of apples. The air was cold, sharp, the kind of cold that made your breath hang in front of you like smoke. The Bigfoot sat near the fence, its back to me, its shoulders rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. I set the basket down a few feet from the fence and stepped back. "I don't know if you understand me," I said quietly, "but I'm listening. I see the stones. I hear the knocking. I know you're trying to tell us something." The Bigfoot didn't move. I waited, the cold seeping through my jacket, my fingers going numb. I was about to turn back when it spoke. Not in words, not in any language I recognized. But it was a voice, low, resonant, shaped like syllables. It rose and fell in a rhythm that felt intentional, deliberate. It sounded like a question. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. The Bigfoot turned its head slightly, just enough that I could see its profile in the floodlights. Its eyes were dark, deep, impossibly human. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking, "but I want to." It made the sound again, softer this time. Then it stood, walked to the fence, and picked up one of the apples. It held it for a moment, studying it, then set it back down gently and stepped away. It wasn't hungry. It was showing me it understood the gesture. I stayed there for a long time, watching the Bigfoot return to its corner and settle down, its gaze fixed on the forest. When I finally walked back inside, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely open the door. Dr. Ellison was waiting in the hallway. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. "It spoke to you, didn't it?" I nodded. She closed her eyes, exhaled slowly. "Then we're running out of time." On November 5th, I saw it for the first time. Not the Bigfoot, the thing it was afraid of. It was just after midnight. I was in the observation room, unable to sleep, scrolling through the camera feeds out of habit more than purpose. The forest beyond the fence was dark, the floodlights only reaching so far before the shadows swallowed everything. I was about to switch off the monitors when something moved. At first, I thought it was a tree branch swaying in the wind, but the air was still. No wind, no movement except for that slow, deliberate shift at the edge of the light. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse quickening. The shape moved again, stepping into the outer edge of the floodlight's reach. It was tall, broader than the Bigfoot. Its form was wrong, asymmetrical, like it was crouched and standing at the same time. It stayed there for nearly a minute, just outside the light, and then it turned and disappeared back into the trees. I rewound the footage, watched it again. The shape was unclear, distorted by distance and shadow, but it was real. Something had been out there, watching. I printed a still frame from the video and brought it to Dr. Ellison the next morning. She studied it for a long time, her face pale. "We need to contact the regional office," she said quietly. "And tell them what?" I asked. "That Bigfoot is afraid of something in the woods." She looked at me, and I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "That's exactly what we tell them." But when she called, the regional office dismissed it. "Probably a bear," they said, "or a moose. Keep monitoring and report if there's any direct threat to the facility." Dr. Ellison hung up and sat in silence, staring at the printed image. "They're not going to help us," I said. "No," she said quietly. "They're not." That night, the Bigfoot moved to the front of the enclosure, as close to the main building as it could get. It stood there facing the forest, its posture rigid, defensive. It knocked on the fence 7 times. Then it turned and looked directly at the observation window. I don't know how it knew I was watching, but it did. It raised its arm, pointed toward the tree line. One last time, then brought its hand to its chest and tapped twice. A heartbeat. The message was clear. Whatever was out there, it was coming. And the Bigfoot wasn't just warning us anymore. It was asking for help. I stayed in the observation room all night, watching the feeds, waiting for the shape to return. It didn't. But at 3 a.m. I heard it. Not knocking, not a voice. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The Bigfoot heard it too. It crouched low, its eyes locked on the darkness. And for the first time, I understood. We weren't the ones keeping it in a cage. It was protecting us from what was outside. On November 7th, I made the decision that would change everything. I went into the enclosure. Dr. Ellison was off-site, attending a meeting with regional supervisors. Collins was in the lab. The other staff were occupied with routine tasks. I had maybe 20 minutes before someone noticed. I accessed the security panel, overrode the lock, and stepped through the reinforced gate into the yard. The cold hit me immediately, sharper than usual, biting through my jacket. The Bigfoot stood near the far fence, its back to me, facing the forest. "Hey," I said quietly. My voice sounded too small, too fragile. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to understand." It didn't turn around. I took a few steps closer, my boots crunching on the gravel. The Bigfoot shifted its weight but didn't move otherwise. "I saw it," I said. "The thing in the woods. I know you're trying to protect us." Slowly, the Bigfoot turned. Up close, it was even more massive than I'd realized. Its shoulders were broad, its arms thick with muscle, its hands large enough to crush bone without effort. But its eyes were calm, sad even. It made a low sound, almost like a sigh, then gestured toward the forest. I followed its gaze. The trees stood silent, dark, waiting. The Bigfoot crouched down, picked up a stick, and began drawing in the dirt, lines, shapes. It drew the facility, the fence, the tree line. Then it drew something beyond the trees, a larger shape, and next to it, smaller shapes. 3 of them. "There's more than one," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The Bigfoot nodded. It actually nodded. I felt the weight of it settle over me, cold and heavy. "How long have they been out there?" It held up both hands, fingers spread. 10. Then it closed its hands and opened them again. 20. It kept going. 30. 40. "Years," I said. It nodded again, then pointed at itself, then at me, then at the facility. It tapped the ground twice. "Stay. You're asking us to stay inside." Another nod. I crouched down next to the drawing, studying the shapes. "What are they?" The Bigfoot made a sound I'll never forget. Low, mournful, like grief-given voice. It pointed at the larger shape it had drawn, then at itself and shook its head. "Not the same." "Not Bigfoot," I said. "Something else." It looked at me, and I saw understanding pass between us. A shared fear, a mutual recognition that we were both small, both vulnerable, both trying to survive something bigger than either of us could comprehend. I stayed there for another 5 minutes, memorizing the drawing, committing every detail to memory. When I finally stood to leave, the Bigfoot reached out and touched my shoulder. Gently, just for a moment. I walked back through the gate, locked it behind me, and went straight to the observation room. I pulled up the external cameras and aimed them at the section of forest the Bigfoot had pointed to. At 3:12 a.m., the shapes appeared. 3 of them, moving between the trees, and they were getting closer. On November 9th, I told Dr. Ellison everything. The conversation in the enclosure, the drawings, the shapes I'd seen on the cameras. She listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with every word. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time, staring at the printed images I'd brought her. Finally, she spoke. "If I report this, they'll shut us down. They'll move the Bigfoot, classify everything, and bury it so deep no one will ever know. And if you don't?" She looked at me, her jaw tight. "Then we're on our own." We decided to keep it quiet, just the 2 of us. We upgraded the perimeter sensors, installed additional cameras, and established a rotation so someone was always monitoring the feeds. Collins noticed the changes but didn't ask questions. The rest of the staff went about their routines, oblivious. The Bigfoot stopped knocking. It didn't need to anymore. We were listening. On November 12th, the shapes came closer. I watched them on the monitors, 3 massive forms moving through the trees with a slow, deliberate purpose. They stayed just beyond the floodlights, testing the perimeter, circling the facility in wide arcs. The Bigfoot paced the enclosure, agitated, its movements sharp and restless. It knocked once, a single sharp blow against the fence, then retreated to the far corner and crouched down low. At 2:33 a.m., the facility shook, not violently, just a subtle vibration, like something heavy had struck the ground nearby. The cameras flickered, the lights dimmed, and then silence. I ran outside, against every instinct screaming at me to stay inside. Dr. Ellison was right behind me, flashlight in hand, her breath coming in short gasps. We reached the perimeter fence and stopped. The forest was silent. Completely, unnaturally silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. And then I saw it, standing just beyond the tree line, barely visible in the shadows. One of the shapes, taller than the Bigfoot, broader. Its eyes caught the light, reflecting pale and cold. Dr. Ellison grabbed my arm, her grip tight enough to hurt. "Get inside. Now." We backed away slowly, keeping our eyes on the tree line, and didn't run until we were through the main door. We locked it behind us, checked every window, every entrance, and returned to the observation room. The shape stayed at the tree line for another hour. Then, just before dawn, it turned and disappeared into the forest. The Bigfoot watched it go, then looked toward the main building, toward us. And for the first time since I'd arrived at the facility, I understood what Dr. Ellison had meant. The Bigfoot wasn't the subject of our research. It was a refugee, a prisoner maybe, but also a guardian. It had been trying to warn us from the beginning, and we'd been too blind, too arrogant to listen. I pulled out my phone and started recording a voice memo, just in case, just so someone would know. November 13th, 2018, Northern British Columbia. If you're hearing this, you need to know. Bigfoot is real, and it's not the only thing out there. I left the facility on November 20th. Dr. Ellison stayed behind, along with a skeleton crew and a new security team brought in from the regional office. They didn't know what they were protecting against. They thought it was just protocol, routine upgrades after the power outage. I didn't tell them otherwise. What would I say? That Bigfoot was trying to save us? That something larger, something worse, was circling the facility like a predator waiting for the right moment? Before I left, I went to the enclosure one last time. The Bigfoot was resting near the fence, its eyes half closed, its breathing slow and steady. It looked tired, worn down. I set a basket of apples near the gate, the same kind I'd brought weeks earlier. The Bigfoot opened its eyes, looked at the basket, then at me. It made a low sound, almost like a sigh, and nodded once. I wanted to say something. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I understand." But the words felt too small for what had passed between us, so I just nodded back and walked away. Dr. Ellison met me at the main gate. She handed me a hard drive, small and unmarked. "Everything's on here," she said, quietly. "The footage, the audio, the drawings. If anything happens, if they try to bury this, you'll have proof." I took the drive, slipped it into my jacket pocket. "What are you going to do?" She looked back at the facility, at the enclosure barely visible through the mist. "I'm going to keep watching, keep listening, and hope that whatever's out there stays in the woods." I wanted to tell her to leave, to get out while she still could, but I knew she wouldn't. This was her life's work, her purpose, and she wasn't going to abandon it, no matter the cost. I drove away that afternoon, the facility disappearing in my rearview mirror, swallowed by mist and trees. I didn't look back. It's been over 5 years now. I live in Vancouver, work a quiet job analyzing environmental data, and try not to think about northern British Columbia. But some nights, when the city goes quiet and the rain taps against the windows, I hear it. 3 knocks, soft, deliberate, and I know it's just my mind playing tricks, just the weight of memory pressing against the present. I still have the hard drive. I've never shared the footage. I've never told anyone the full story, because I know what would happen. Hunters would flood the area. Researchers would descend. The Bigfoot would be taken, studied, dissected, and whatever's out there in the woods, the things it was protecting us from, would be free to move closer. So I stay quiet. I keep the secret. And late at night, when I can't sleep, I whisper the word into the dark. Bigfoot. Not with fear, not with doubt, just with gratitude.